Hi, this is Bill, and today I'm going to talk about excess deaths in the United States. I was interested in this, or started doing this back in 2021 because I was a critic of these lockdown policies, and as I showed in previous videos, I kind of post this one about every year. These lockdowns were pretty deadly, so. Uh, yeah. So anyway, I get all this data from the CDC, or as I like to call it, the cat dog gov agency, and they only get the final data like very late in the year. Even some of this data I'll show is provisional. So yeah, definitely this stuff works at the speed of government. And the interesting thing to note is that cancer cases or cancer deaths in 2024 have really spiked up a lot. So that is of concern. And anyway, let's go to the charts and figures. Anyway, here's a plot of U.S. deaths as a function of time, 2010 up until 2024. That's this dark line here, and this comes from the CDC, but I'll tell you, the CDC does not report its data in a homogeneous way. I mean, generally prior to 2020, they reported as age-adjusted deaths, and I know why they're doing this is because the leading cause of death basically is just getting old, and so with the population increasing and aging, there will be a general trend for deaths just to go up, even though there may not be any, you say new existential, I don't know what that's the right word, causes of people dying. So that's why they do it. But then in 2020, kind of during this lockdown period or the COVID pandemic period, they reported the raw numbers, which actually I like that better. I like to just deal with the detrending myself. And now in 2024, they report it as basically give it a unitless number. They call it a death rate, but as best I can tell, it's number of deaths per 100,000 U.S. population per year, but reported quarterly. So what that basically means is that to convert it to a total death, I guess the right thing to do is you'd have to know what the U.S. population is, which of course itself is increasing during the year, and convert each of the four numbers accordingly. I just took the average of the quarterly death rates, and the average U.S. population between 2025 and 2024, and calculated basically a total mortality, which is this point here. So I went and looked to see if there was a more definitive figure on the internet, and they came up with a ridiculously low figure of like 2.8 million, which that's down here. I knew that wasn't right, so I thought, okay, we'll go to the know-it-all chat GPT. You gotta love this. So I asked, how many deaths were there in the United States in 2024? It basically said the question was too hard for it to answer. So I have to go with the number I've derived, and I think it's pretty close to what it probably actually is. So anyway, one of the things you do need to do, though, is, as I said, the death rate is going up with time, again, because of the aging population and growing population. So in order to get an excess death estimate from the time after 2019, you need to estimate what you think a normal year of deaths would be. This is, like if COVID had never come. So this dashed line here fits the first 10 years here up to 2019, and then then it's just an extrapolation. So the excess death is the difference from here to here, and excess death, say in 2024, would be from here to here. And so as you can see, in 2023 and 2024, it looks like it's returned back to the trend line. This looks like a pretty good fit to me, so I believe I can trust the trend line is being representative. However, I will confess that maybe this difference here is not significant, because the further you extrapolate this thing, the bigger the error will be. So, but anyway, it does look like we're getting back close to what we would expect death-wise. Okay, this is the interesting one here, is when we break down the deaths by cause of death. And so here we got heart cancer, unintended injuries, lower respiratory, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, flu, kidney, suicide, COVID, and all else. And these numbers here is the ranking of deaths. I think it was based on 2023. And so I do the same thing here. I take the data prior to 2020, fit a trend line to it. Like that's this line you see through here. And the actual data is the wiggly line. And then you see the spike up during the pandemic period, 2020 through 2022. And then you can see it's kind of returning closer to normal. This number here is the total number of excess deaths. That's basically the number of deaths under this curve here that exceed what you would have expected from the trend line. And then this number over here, in the case for heart disease, is 0.95, is how well the trend line fits the prior data, so it kind of gives you confidence for how accurately you may think you could estimate this excess deaths. For cancer, as I say, this number really bumped up, and I'll tell you why. The correlation for the previous period is not as good. It's 0.71. As I said, the closer this number is to 1, the more confident you can be. And as I say, if it goes to 0, then you have 0 confidence that it's useful for any predictive purposes. So as you can see, cancer was rising and then it started decreasing, like we were actually making medical progress in dealing with this. And then, of course, it spiked up during the pandemic period, but it looked like it was coming back down. And then suddenly in 2024, this right here, it spiked right back up, back to probably as big a difference as we saw during the height of the pandemic. And then unintended injuries is this guy here. Has a good correlation, but it looks like that one's trending down. Lower respiratory, this is like COPD and pneumonia. This one has not a great correlation, but it looks like it actually has been going down. Stroke has a stronger correlation, 0.91, and it definitely has been going up during the pandemic period. It also is showing a bit of a spike up, not to the degree cancer is. This is Alzheimer's. Looks like we're doing better with Alzheimer's now than what we were in the past, relatively speaking. Diabetes, good correlation up until, well, good correlation for the previous data, and then you can see a lot of excess deaths during the pandemic period. Flu has actually gone down, but it has a very poor correlation, and that you'd expect because flu is not something that's really correlated by population and, well, at least not strongly so, population and aging. I mean, generally you can have really good mild years and bad years, and they can happen at any time. Kidney disease, interestingly enough, was something that popped up during the pandemic period, and it also seems to be slowly recovering. Then this is suicides. And then COVID, of course, we have a perfect correlation for COVID. One, because the disease didn't exist prior to 2020, so we could confidently predict that it would always be 0 relative. Anyone dying of COVID is an excess death by definition. So you got this curve, and then everything else, basically you take the total number of deaths and subtract all this stuff off, and you get left with these deaths, and that's what this curve here is. So one of the things that has been discussed is what is the cause of the excess deaths, and I've heard one person or one view was that, it was all COVID deaths make up the excess. Well, that's not true. COVID makes up about 75% of them, but you got definitely excess deaths here for heart, cancer, stroke, diabetes, and then lesser amounts in some of the other areas. And I posited that, and I still believe this, that these excess deaths, particularly in the heart, the diabetes, the stroke, are probably related to the safer at home lockdown orders. People just became less active, gyms were closed, And yeah, I think people just became less active, and it really it adversely impacted their health. Cancer could have gone up. It may be related to this too, but also the fact that a lot of hospitals were closed or limited in what they could do, so people were not getting their cancer screens with well, not as regularly or routinely as they were before. And so we saw this bump up. As I say, that could be due, as I say, just due to preventative care being neglected, or may have a lifestyle fitness component of being stuck at home. So, but obviously that's not the case now. So you see, this is really spiked up. So, and by the way, it's spiked up to an excess amount now that's comparable to the peak of the pandemic. I don't know what's causing that, and yeah, this is not really good news. Okay, this page here is like the previous page, except what I've done is I've subtracted the trend line off of the total data, so you basically get the difference between the actual line and the trend line. So in effect, 0 would be 0 excess deaths, and anything above would actually be excess death, or in some cases it could even go negative if the number of deaths decrease. So that it's just a different way of presenting the data. Here we got these dashed lines, which is the uncertainty in based on how well that trend line fit, to give you some idea if an excess or deficit death would be considered significant, based on how good you're able to fit and then further extrapolate the previous data. So as you can see in heart disease, yeah, I mean, this is very significantly above these dashed lines. And then in 2023, we're basically at the uncertainty levels, a little bit above it now this year. But cancer, look at cancer, what happened here. Cancer was significantly above the trend line. It looked like it was on its way to return down towards it, like heart, but then it's now bumped right back up again. And as I say, the amount of excess deaths in 2024, it's a little bit less than what we saw in 2021, but it's close. Unintended injuries were actually doing better there in reducing those. Same with lower respiratory. Stroke, again, some that probably be more fitness related. We see that peak during the pandemic period. It seemed like it was coming back down to the trend line, and now it's gone up a little bit. Alzheimer's actually decreased since 2020, significantly so, according to the analysis here. Diabetes is one that has come down, and now it's kind of in the uncertainty range, and it seems to be staying down there, and that's good. Of course, flu, most of it is in the noise uncertainty, although I guess we've had a slight significant decline in flu cases in the last 3 or 4 years. Kidney disease is slightly above the uncertainty line. As I say, it did peak in the pandemic period. Suicides actually, according to analysis, is actually gone down. But one of the problems I did have with the suicide data is that when the CDC had the first batch of data, it was all based on this age-adjusted stuff. They reported no data for suicide, so I had to get that from a third party. And then from 2020, they actually did report suicide, so there could be a data continuity issue here that might explain this. But we are only talking about 2,000 or 3,000 deaths, out of a million, so it's not going to be a big impact. This is COVID. Of course, it runs 0 to 2020, and then it bumps right up, and then it drops right. 2023 it dropped right down, and 2024 it's down. And to put this in perspective, the number of COVID deaths in 2023 and 2024 are similar to flu deaths now. So getting the flu today would be just as deadly as getting COVID now. So, say COVID, it seems to have gone back down to the levels of flu. So to summarize this all up, during the lockdown period, we had about 1.25 million excess deaths, of which you could explain 1 million of those by COVID deaths. So you had 250,000 due to, basically non-COVID, and most of these were related to, mainly as heart cancer, stroke and diabetes. In other words, lifestyle sorts of things. And as I say, I really believe that these lockdowns were deadly. They kept people at home, and they got less fit. Gyms were closed, and I won't rail on that because that really upset me a lot. One of the questions that has come up, I won't dwell on it too much here, is whether the vaccine caused these excess deaths. And I think this could show that it probably did not, because by looking at these ratios, here's the position I take. I haven't heard anybody say that the vaccine causes diabetes. Mainly the issue with the vaccine and side effects is that it can affect the heart. In other words, myocarditis or cause heart problems that could lead to death that way. So the argument goes like this: in 2020, basically we had no vaccine, and and the ratio of diabetes to heart was up here, and then in 2021 and 2022, where the vaccine was being administered widely, instead of this ratio going way down as you would expect if the heart disease went up disproportionately relative to diabetes, it pretty much just continued its long normal track. So I would say that argues that the vaccine probably wasn't responsible for these excess heart disease. As I said, I'm the one who believes it was a lifestyle issue that did all this. And looking at the ratio of cancer to heart is kind of interesting, because you see it steadily going down, which what this means is that relative to heart disease, we were actually doing better with cancer. In other words, disproportionately more people were dying of heart disease than they were cancer. And this was even accelerated during the pandemic period, but now notice we've reversed. Before the pandemic, we were here, and we kind of came back to this point. Now it looks like we're trending back up, and that's a concern. And then just last plot I'll show here is COVID to flu. And this dashed line here is the 1-to-1 line. So obviously when COVID first hit, it was like causing, basically 10 deaths to every one flu death, at its worst in 2021. But now we can see that COVID is actually even a little bit less than 1-to-1 at this point. So, okay. As I say, if you get COVID, your likelihood of dying from it would be no different than if you got the flu. So I actually thought this would probably be the last time I would even do this video, but now that cancer cases are spiking up, that's a new finding here. And I've heard other people talk about this. I don't know why this is happening. I guess some people think it could be what we're doing to our food. Maybe there's too much glyphosate being used these days. So that's a concern. And put this in perspective, is like had cancer, the degree that cancer deaths have spiked up, it's like between 6 and 7% higher than what you would have expected from the trend line. So that's not, that's not cool. So anyway, if you like this video, please like and subscribe and comment. And I'm going to try not to, I really try not to get too political with this one as I have in the past, so I'll leave it at that. Anyway, it all helps me with my low self-esteem, and until next time, good night.